afternoon, everyone. My name is Malcolm Graham of the Charlotte City Council and Chairman of the Great Neighborhoods Committee. Would like to welcome you to the Wednesday, June 16th committee meeting. So the meeting is officially called to order. I would like to take the opportunity to introduce the council members who are here with me in person, and then we'll introduce those who are virtual, and then we'll follow that with introduction of our staff.
Good afternoon. I'm Julie Eisel, Mayor Pro Tem, serving at large and committee member.
We'll go virtual.
Corey Watlington, District 3.
Tarek Bakar, District 6.
And I think we're waiting for Mr. Winston to join us as well. And so we'll start with staff introduction here at the Government Center, and then we'll move to those who are with us virtually.
Good afternoon, Emily Kunze, City Manager's Office.
Good afternoon, Pamela Weidman, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Good afternoon, Donanda Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
And those who are virtual.
Sean Heath, City Manager's Office.
Good afternoon, Nicole Story, Housing and Neighborhood Services.
Willie Rapp-Short, Community Relations Committee.
Tiffany Blackwell, Strategy and Budget.
Todd DeLong, Economic Development.
And we were just joined here in person by our city attorney. Welcome to the meeting. We'll first start off with an overview of the agenda. So I'll throw it to Ms. Wyman.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. Good afternoon. We have 3 items on our agenda today. We have a Legacy Commission update that will be provided by Emily Coons from the City Manager's Office. We have a Fair Chance Housing update that will be provided by Willie Radsford from Community Relations. And then we have a rental subsidy requirements and city-supported housing update that we will be provided by myself. So a pretty packed agenda today. Before we get started, though, I want to go back to something that you all tasked us with several meetings ago. And what that was you tasked us with telling our story more. What we hear a lot about in this committee is housing work. And so we know that housing in neighborhoods and great neighborhoods is more than housing. Housing is certainly an important part. And so today I just want to share with you all a good news story. And our goal is to do more of this as we start our meetings, just so that we can all celebrate the great work that you all empower and allow us to do every day. So just allow me a few minutes, if you will. The City of Charlotte's Mayor's Youth Employment Program was founded 35 years ago to create career development opportunities and economic mobility for Charlotte's youth through paid work experiences. Students participate in this program in 2 ways: at an in-person work experience with a business here in Charlotte, or through one of 6 virtual career paths, including business and finance, technology, advanced manufacturing, healthcare, innovation, and sports and entertainment marketing. These pathways were designed in partnership with businesses and CMS, Radius Learning, and LinkedIn Learning. As the single largest provider of youth work experiences in the region, the Mayor's Youth Employment Program provides the opportunity for upward economic mobility to our youth who so greatly need and deserve this opportunity. Despite the pandemic, 379 youth worked more than 38,000 hours and earned more than $400,000 as a cohort in 2020. That's real money and real face time with potential future employers. This year, as I previously said, we're celebrating 35 years of providing meaningful experiences for Charlotte's youth and are on track to have an even greater impact. We're projecting that 506 students will participate in paid work experiences this summer, 177 of those in-person opportunities at 51 different host employers, and 329 students participating in virtual career pathways. The city will also host 8 students in 5 different departments. Our Charlotte program is setting the example for youth workforce programs across the state and nationally. The 2020 Virtual Pathways program was featured by Bloomberg as one of 2 youth workforce development programs can be scaled statewide. Program staff also serve as advisors to youth workforce programs in New York, Phoenix, Raleigh,
and providing project management to the implementation of the recommendations by the Legacy Commission, and wanted to provide you an update today. For 2020, and in July 2020, a 15-member commission was appointed by the mayor and city council. They were charged with engaging in a comprehensive study of street names and monuments in the city of Charlotte that streets and changing their memorial landscape. And those cities included Phoenix, Eugene, Atlanta, Richmond, Portland, Austin, Greensboro, New Orleans, Memphis, Dallas, and Hollywood, Florida. So we co-created an implementation plan and schedule along with Mecklenburg County. An engagement strategy with residents from the Jefferson Davis Street. Facilitate this process when the names are changed, to give them information on what the county and city will automatically do, and in terms of notifying them know realized while we went through this process is that a lot of the behind the scenes work beyond the street blade replacement, address verification for 911 purposes, there's a whole slew of things that go on behind the scenes. So we thought, instead of rolling out community engagement for all streets at once, and then one street might have to wait change, that we would roll out the engagement and implement Pfeiffer Avenue has no residents and no businesses on that street, and so we identified that as low-hanging fruit in terms of being able to implement a change there quickly. So we anticipate that each stage, each process is going to take about 105 days, driven mostly by community engagement, and then also a 45-day period between notification of the new name and effective date, which will give time for CDOT to do the name blade changes and for all our systems to be updated, and give 45 days for the residents and property owners and businesses to update their information. We intend in August to engage residents of Jackson Avenue, Zebulon Avenue, Aycock Lane, and that will be about August to October, with installation in November. We will engage next West Hill Street and Morrison Avenue. We look at October to December for engagement, and installation from January to February 2022, because they're larger streets. It's going to take a little bit more time. We're going to, in December, begin with Behringer Drive, with installation anticipated in March to April 2022, and finally begin engagement with Stonewall Street in February to April, with installation happening May through June 2022, and that would wrap up the street installation phase 1 process. The next phase, phase 2, involves the commemorative landscape and education portion. And so the commemorative landscape, the recommendations by the commission included creating commemorative spaces across the city that feature Charlotteans of all backgrounds who advocated for positive change, creating a wall with names of enslaved people who lived in Charlotte and helped build Charlotte, install interpretive signage to explain Confederate memorials located in city-owned cemeteries, and to support efforts to install the lynching memorial from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. Next slide. So currently, what's in progress is we've been collaborating with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Remembrance Commission to affirm responsibilities, goals, and progress for installing the memorial from the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in remembrance of Joe McNeely and Willie McDaniel. They have expressed some need for some financial support. We're still waiting on them to submit a formal proposal and timeline for their work, but we have been meeting with them and are supportive of their efforts. Next steps is we need to collaborate with local artists to talk about what does creating a commemorative landscape look like and how do we approach that in different spaces around the city. I have to mention that none of phase 2 has funding at this point. We did look into the Mellon Foundation grant. However, it is only for 501c3 organizations and it's by invitation only. So we would need to partner with a nonprofit in Charlotte to apply, to be invited to apply for the grant. But we want to look at doing that, but we also want to explore other funding and grant opportunities in this process. And we will commission an interpretive signage for the cemetery, and also we want to install historic markers for the renamed streets so that there is a history at each location of what the Legacy Commission did and what the community did to rename their street and reclaim their identity. The other part of phase 2 is education. The commission recommendations were to offer presentations about history to elected officials and city, county, and CMS staff, provide educational materials about this history to CMS and other local schools, and to post online resources about this history, which would be available and accessible to all that are interested. So in progress, we've scheduled an educational presentation by Dr. Karen Cox and Dr. Willie Griffin. It's scheduled for next Tuesday, June 22nd, but I understand that might be pushed off a week in order so that we can build more momentum for it and let people know it's happening and do more marketing around it. So I'm not sure if the date is going to change, but right now it is June 22nd. We've scheduled a meeting with CMS to discuss options and opportunities to include this Legacy Commission recommendation into curriculum. And we're exploring other opportunities for programming at perhaps the local museum and other community engagement opportunities. Our next steps would be to build out the website with more educational resources, videos, and links to resources. And I also had an idea of exploring the development of an app that would allow the public to identify and explore places in Charlotte impacted by the Legacy Commission recommendations. And I've also been exploring with Charlotte Communications the possibility of documenting all of this, because I think what we're embarking on is very historic and momentous, and I think it would be great if we could document some of the process of what we're doing in these neighborhoods and streets. So that's where we are in terms of progress, and we will, like I said before, we'll be rolling out the pilot program on Monday. The survey opens, and we hope to get a lot of feedback from the community so that we can learn lessons in terms of what else could we improve on? What else do we need to do? But I'm really, really excited about this project, and I think the members of the community impacted are also very supportive and excited. So I will stop there, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Emily. I want to say that I really appreciate the work. I was extremely excited to get and receive the presentation. I know a number of committee members have been waiting for a while. Just in summary, 2 questions, and then the Mayor Pro Tem has one as well. One, in summary, so we're going to do all the streets within the next year.
Yes.
Have we made any differential between smaller streets where there's like almost like a no-brainer, like the one that doesn't have any residents and or businesses versus a street like a Stonewall Street and a Morrison, which is a major thoroughfare intersection street? The same criteria for both?
In terms of criteria, do you mean the engagement process?
Yeah, the engagement process.
I think that we are looking at the smaller streets and the demographics of the streets and plan to do kind of, I think, a deeper dive into community engagement in those areas where we can do door knocking and talking to people and making sure they're aware of the survey and what's going on. I think in larger areas, there'll probably be more engagement online in terms of, you look at Morrison Avenue, there's a ton of apartments. I think there's like 500 apartment condos. And so I think but they also are pretty well organized in terms of HOAs and so forth. So I think that we'll do a lot of outreach that way as well. But I certainly would welcome Nicole Story, who's over the community engagement process, if she wanted to comment more about strategy in terms of the different neighborhoods, to comment on that.
Emily, I think you've done a great job. The schedule has been defined with a lot of CDOT input, and I really want to recognize them. When we began this process, we were looking at 2 years, and they've really been able to leverage resource to get us down to 1 year.
Okay. And my second question, and probably on page 6, phase 1 street name changes, bullet number 3, renaming sections should be community driven. I agree. Final decision should be reserved for residents and owners of the street being named and will be shared with city council. So the council has no role in terms of, one, identifying the street name, and what's our role? And I think that's maybe a question a lot of members may want to ask as well, especially, again, the smaller streets. I get it, community input. The larger streets, which is going to probably draw a lot more community spotlight and debate. Who's the final authority on that? The way this is written, it's not the council. It will be shared with the council. So help me understand that school of thought.
Well, when we began planning the engagement process, the direction that we really saw from the recommendations was community input, community input, community input, and that's kind of what drove our decision making. But ultimately, it is up to council. If you want to go in a different direction, there was the recommendations did not stipulate a certain process. We just thought that it would be great for these communities to, have that power to change their names, but certainly the council has the ability to make other recommendations because each area is different and unique. And I'm sure, so you let us know.
Ms. Wyden?
And Mr. Graham, if I might add, Ms. Blackwell, Tiffany Blackwell is also on the call, and she kind of has more of a historical presence of kind of what was discussed and how we landed on the recommendations and kind of what with the final naming, how that will fall. So Tiffany, I wanted to invite you to the conversation. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to share as it relates to that question.
Sure. Because there was a lot of debate about having streets named after persons or places or any other versions of nouns, it was really recommended that the community have a large input, and then also city staff, in alignment with other goals for city streets and the criteria that they have for streets, to be able to have the final decision making when it comes to the street names. I recall Councilmember Bakari giving us the feedback to not have streets named after persons to begin with, simply because one person's hero could be someone else's zero. So I think city staff is trying to weigh all of those options and determine street names that would hopefully put us in a position to keep us in a place where we would not be engaging in this work 10 and 20 years down the future.
Okay, well, I'll leave that debate open for the committee to have. I think that will be a debate we have here, or we'll have it at the full council meeting. I don't have a problem with it, even if it's just the committee or the community selects 1 or 2 or 3 names and they forward those names to the council for final approval. Or I think that the council needs to be in the process at some point. I can be persuaded differently by my colleagues if they think different, but that's just my initial thought when I heard it for the first time. But I can be persuaded to go as it is based on the conversation from members of the committee. Mayor Pro Tem, you have another point?
Just one more point to make. And also, we know that, getting things on an agenda and getting them kind of through can be a lengthy process. And so we're just trying to also, Mr. Graham and council members, balance that with doing this work within the time frame that Ms. Kuntz had laid out. But I'm totally open to kind of your feedback if you want these brought back to the committee or how you want to handle those. But just wanted to remind us of the tight schedule that we're trying to accomplish as well.
We know people to get stuff on the agenda. So we got the mayor pro tem and the mayor and the manager. So I just think that because I can kind of sense that, but I'll just wait and hear the discussion. But point well taken, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Emily, thanks for the great presentation. It's really, I think we've gotten a couple emails recently to ask where this stood, so it's nice to be able to have this information to relay back. So 2 things that I wanted to mention. One, ask about, as I said, we have gotten emails from other neighborhoods who would like to change their neighborhood name, their street name. How would they go about getting in the process of being considered for wave 2, if you will, of doing this? What's the process?
I would simply say they should start by sending an email to legacy@charlottenc.gov.
Okay.
And we can direct them to CDOT that handles the process of renaming, and they can steer them through that process.
Okay.
But I think that's probably the easiest way, and we'll make sure that they're given all that they need to be successful.
Okay, great. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about was with regards to the lynching memorial. What's, gosh, I think we went to see that a few years ago when we were talking about what it would take to get those memorials back here. Is it strictly at this point the 501c3 body that has to facilitate bringing it here, or is it still, where is it going to go? Is it simply a matter of money?
I think there's some funding that they're looking at, but they're still working out their timeline. I heard that they collected soil samples and have sent them to the national organization, but I have not touched base with them in a couple of weeks, so I'm not sure exactly where else they are in the process.
Okay.
But the funding that they asked from us was more marketing and art and video related. It wasn't related to the actual bringing. So I'm not sure exactly what their entire plan is around that portion of the landscape.
Because I don't have the right to say this at all, but I just will throw it out there that when we move forward with our new arts funding model proposal, how that money can be used, I think that establishing this national memorial involving the local arts community to create commemorative space would be certainly, I would hope to see that there would be a grant opportunity in that funding for something like this, because that could be a great way to really broaden what we say, we want to do for arts and culture in the community, especially from an equity standpoint. So just to keep that in mind, is if that's a hurdle, that should certainly be something that we would talk about as we move along. That's really it for me, and I'm glad to see that the effort to document this, whether it be in the archive room at the public library or something like that. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Bakari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree with your point on being a more of a broad, full council discussion. So I'll just kind of make the comment again. My strongest recommendation would be we set guardrails around this process by which we don't allow the naming of streets going forward to be named after individuals. It's just impossible, as was said more elegantly than me a minute ago, it's impossible to imagine a council in the future and the lens of the future, how they look upon things we think are normal or regular today. And in many cases, we're experiencing that now. So avoiding that altogether, I'm sure councils of the future would greatly thank us and appreciate it. And I think if we go that route, I would think that we probably wouldn't need a touch point back to council, because unless something is crazy that I can't imagine occurs, there probably wouldn't be controversy. It would be more branding of neighborhoods. I know that's what's happening on Morrison right now with the South Park groups discussing more of a branding type approach of South Park Boulevard and things like that. So I think that is an easier out for us to not have to have that council checkpoint. However, if we decide against that, I think I would probably, while not love that approach, agree with you, Mr. Chair, and your point of we would probably need some kind of council touch point to ensure that the full city view had a chance to be weighed in on it. And I don't look forward to that in the event that there are controversial options to consider. So hopefully that's kind of 2 points there to for us to keep in the back of our heads.
Thank you, sir. Any other members willing to weigh in on the debate? I see none, and so I think we continue to march forward. All right, thank you. Next on the agenda is Mr. Radford, Fair Chance Housing Update. Willie, welcome to the meeting.
Thank you, Councilman Grimm and members of the committee. I have been tasked with providing you all an update on the fair chance housing that we have been working on maybe a little over almost a year now. You all will recall that back in November of 2020, you all had asked us, you approved a path for us moving forward. I'm going to talk about the committee direction, give you an update on some of the activities of the Community Relations Committee, and the path forward that we've determined coming within the next few months or so. You can flip the slide now, Wendy. Thank you. So as I was saying, in November of 2020, we got a charge from you all to examine fair chance housing. The thinking at that time was that when the question was being asked if we should consider this fair chance or housing discrimination based on criminal background as protected status in the city's fair housing ordinance, we wanted, as a part of this process, to see if there was a business case for such a decision. And this process of what we've been doing is trying to establish whether there is or is not a business case for that. And so some of the things that we've done based upon what you asked includes collecting data to determine current practices and the scope of the problem locally, looking at education opportunities or education and outreach for landlords and people exiting prison and the court systems. And you also asked that we consider additional recommendations that might come forward as we move through this process. And so the last time that we actually updated you all was on February the 17th. And so this is our first update since that time. But since November, since February 17th, the Community Relations Committee's Fair Housing staff has continued to investigate complaints that are received by our investigators. We have continued to monitor the guidance that we got from HUD regarding fair chance housing, and that guidance has not changed since the last time that we talked. The Community Relations Committee, in conjunction with Housing and Neighborhood Services, has developed a very comprehensive when you rent handbook. We have that book in English, and we're in the process of having it translated to Spanish because we want to make sure that everyone in the community, at least at the very least, has an opportunity to understand what his or her housing rights are. And then we took an opportunity during April of this year, and April is Fair Housing Month nationally, to highlight fair chance housing during this special month. And we have actually working again with Housing and Neighborhood Services, established an outreach and work plan, which we will share at a later time. Since last time, we have extended our existing partnerships with Reentry Housing Alliance. We actually partnered with them to present a virtual training in April. We had a 4-hour training on the 2016 HUD guidance, and we've worked with Reentry Housing to distribute education and materials on listserv as well as to the people that they come into contact with on a daily basis. We have also worked with and engaged the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department with rental enforcement, their rental enforcement units who distribute education materials to listserv. And one of our primary partners has been the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association, who also worked with us to present a virtual training back in April that was called Avoiding Fair Housing Pitfalls, Best Practices for Qualifying Prospective Residents. And in addition to Reentry Housing and CMPD's Rental Enforcement Unit, the Apartment Association has also agreed to distribute education materials to the people that they come into contact on a daily basis. So some of the outcomes that have happened, we had 60 participants who actually participated in the virtual training, and these were both landlords and tenants. And we would note that we received significant pushback from landlords at the training. Their primary concern was that they did not have a good understanding of HUD guidelines, and they felt strongly that they should not be responsible for determining whether or not an applicant is reformed. I'm not quite sure that that's what the guidance says, but that is the way that they're taking it, and it seems to be some form of NIMBYism, which I understand. The education and outreach program that we've actually have engaged in since November of 2020 and February of this year, we think has been very effective in that prior to this education and outreach campaign by us, during the previous 5 years, we actually received one fair housing complaint in which the person alleged that they were a victim of discrimination based upon their criminal background status. However, since we have been out in the community providing this training over the past couple of months, we've actually received 5 complaints within the past 2 months. And so 5 complaints in 2 months versus 1 complaint in 5 years, we believe is an indication that word is getting out. And as word continues to get out, we should expect to receive additional complaints in the future. With regards to our path forward, we will continue to investigate complaints as they are received, and we will document the number of calls and inquiries that we get about such complaints as a part of the process to establish whether there's a business case to make fair chance housing protected status under the Charlotte Fair Housing Ordinance. We will continue to update our education and outreach materials to incorporate fair chance housing and best practices and how that should be implemented locally. We will also continue to expand, to explore expanding and existing and create new partnerships. Right now, our primary partners as listed here are Reentry Housing Alliance, the Exodus Foundation, the Sheriff's Department, who we made some contact with to provide education for inmates, Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, and the Greater Charlotte Apartment Association. That work, again, will be to increase landlord education and to increase tenant awareness as well as awareness of those to those who may be currently incarcerated. We will also continue to identify the magnitude of the problem. For example, outcomes of increased education to individuals exiting incarceration and to landlords, and we will keep you all posted. I'll give you additional updates. My guess is in the next 2 or 3 months, as the information that we perceive is developed. We will also continue to work with North Carolina's Task Force on Racial Equity in Criminal Justice to advocate for amendments to state landlord-tenant laws. Some of you may be aware that the governor appointed a task force that has some concern about racial equity in our justice system. And they have provided a list of 60-something odd recommendations that things that local municipalities like Charlotte-Mecklenburg might consider to address racial equity in criminal justice. And one of those was to amend the current state landlord-tenant laws, which might work against people who are formerly incarcerated in terms of them seeking housing. We will also continue research in other states and get some sense of what their best practices are and what, if anything, that we might find useful with that information. We'll continue to look at the federal level to see what, if any, additional guidance we might get from HUD. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we will continue to provide periodic updates to you all as a committee. With that, I'll answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Willie, for your presentation. And I open the floor for questions from the committee members. Any questions based on Willie's fine report?
Just a comment, Willie, thank you for that information. It does sound like we need, I think it's kind of one of those things like we see in domestic violence until people are afraid to come forward until they know that there really is help and that somebody's going to get them out of a bad situation that otherwise they might face retribution for. So with that said, I think you expressed that we don't have a lot of data that we can really dig into to determine how to best improve the situation. So I think I do support that we have to really keep on this, continue to investigate and see what the data points say.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Any other questions or comments from the committee? I just want to reflect for the record that Councilmember Winston is with us today, so the record should reflect that. Any other comments, questions? It's a quiet group today. All right. Thank you, Willie, for your presentation.
Thank you.
The last item on the agenda is Ms. Wyman. She's the staff resource in this one. Rental subsidy requirements for city-supported housing. I turn it over to our housing director, Ms. Wyman.
Thank you, Mr. Graham. This presentation is a follow-up from a conversation that you all had as a council on February 22nd during your council meeting. During that meeting, you all asked staff to develop a policy requiring acceptance of housing choice vouchers and other forms of rental subsidy in all city-supported housing. And so we are not asking you to take any action today, but if you desire to, you certainly can. We wanted to come back to you and update you on our work to kind of share our learnings and to share with you what we have as a draft policy. What I will say is you'll see some of this is modeled off of what Raleigh, North Carolina, they recently approved a resolution that is similar, requiring it in all developments that are supported with city housing dollars. And so if you'll just allow me, I'll just walk through this really quickly and then see what questions and or comments you all have. Just by owning an economic development perspective and then some proposed next steps. Owning an economic development perspective and then some proposed next steps. So again, on February 22nd, you all directed us to take this action and to draft this type of policy. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. Actually, if you'll go to the next slide for me as well. And so in terms of a proposed policy, what we've developed is prospective tenants in city-supported developments of affordable housing will not be disqualified from participating or residing in those housing units based on refusal of a property owner to consider any lawful source of income. And I do want to highlight the word any lawful source of income, and I'll talk a little bit more about what those are. What I also want to highlight, though, is that this policy, this proposed policy, is not intended to prevent a property owner or a landlord from determining in a commercially reasonable way to determine if a person can actually afford to live in the said property. If you go to the next slide for me, please. In terms of what we mean by city-supported developments, basically what we're suggesting is that any development where the city provides financial assistance or subsidized in any way in terms of a real estate conveyance for the production of the affordable housing units. And when we talk about affordable housing units, we are talking about both multifamily and for sale housing units for households earning at or below 80% of the area median income, and that is consistent with your other policies as well. When we talk about lawful source of income, we're meaning income earned from a lawful profession or job or an occupation, any government or private assistance. That could be a grant, a loan, any rental assistance program included under the Fair Housing Act of 1937. And then also any legal documented gift, inheritance, any pension, any annuity, alimony, child support, or other type of income that people might receive as well. And just, we won't do a history lesson on the Fair Housing Act of 1937, but basically what the federal government did at that time is basically it made subsidies available from the government to local housing, public housing agencies to improve the living conditions for low-income families. If you'll go to the next slide for me, please. And so in terms of implementation, this is, you've heard me say a number of times, this is currently a practice for housing trust fund developments, and we know that those are only a portion. And so what we want to do is we want to broaden it to other types of developments. But housing trust fund developers and property managers who operate those developments, this already occurs. And what I mean by this is they particularly, we know that housing choice vouchers are the largest source of rental subsidies in our community and most communities. And so these developments, these multifamily developments, they already accept housing choice vouchers. That's a part of the city's requirement. It's a part of the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's requirements as well. And so these developers do this. We're going to further codify that, though, and put it not only in our guidelines, but and put it in all of our legal documents, just to remove any question about that. We also will be including specific language around this in our other documents, developments that are funded, for example, with CDBG dollars, with our home dollars as well, just to make sure that it is in all of our documents and there's a fair understanding across the board of this, should you guys approve of this. And then so the question becomes how will developers, what will happen to developers if they're in violation of this? They'll be in violation if it's the sole reason for denying an applicant is because of their source of income. And then what we will do is, again, we'll have to market this. We'll have to make sure residents know that you guys have approved this policy, and residents who believe that they've been denied access based on source of income or rental subsidy, they will be encouraged to call 311 to lodge a complaint and or to contact community relations to lodge this complaint, and it will be investigated. We did some research around the country. We looked at San Antonio, particularly they kind of have a 3-step violation process, and so we believe that is something that we want to adopt here as well, or some version of that. You all also asked us, if you'll go to the next slide for me, please, you all asked us to look at what we could do from a rezoning, through the rezoning process, and you also asked us to look at what we would do from a TIF perspective. And again, if you guys would go to the next slide for me, please. From a rezoning request, we did have a meeting with the city attorney who kind of oversees the rezoning process. And the advice that we were given, and Mr. Baker is in the room also, if we want to have further conversation on this, is that we would need enabling legislation if we in order to require this through the rezoning process, because that process is really about a land use decision. Also, you all asked us if we could require this through the tax increment financing process. My colleague Todd DeLong from the ED department is on the line. So we got a pretty definitive answer on the rezoning request. We want to continue to explore with the ED staff the possibility of applying this proposed policy to future TIFs that are given where there will be multifamily developments receiving TIF support. We don't know. What we were informed by ED colleagues or reminded of is that many of our TIFs are simply about infrastructure. Not all TIFs involve housing, and not all TIFs that involve housing involve affordable housing. So I'm going to pause right here and see if Todd DeLong, or even Mr. Baker, if there are any points that you want to add on the rezoning and the TIF perspectives there.
Thank you, Ms. Whiteman. Todd, Mr. Baker, the floor is open if you have any comments.
As it relates to the rezoning, again, we just get into that situation where it's clear that the statutes are focused on land use issues and not to add any other issues to tie to rezoning request. And that's the basis for our opinion that in all likelihood, we would need some level of special legislation or general legislation to be able to go into that forefront.
Okay. Todd, any comments?
Yeah, I'll just add, as it relates to tax increment grants, we're continuing to work with housing.
Can you speak into your microphone, Todd, for me?
Yes, sorry. As it relates to tax increment grants, we are continuing to work with the Housing Services team to determine the appropriate language for the policy, as well as look at some of our more recent agreements and how that may have impacted those if the policy was applied to those. For example, Ballantyne Reimagined, as we had affordability requirements as part of those agreements, I believe this policy actually would have covered, or those agreements would have covered what's already in these policies, because the housing requirements would have included LIHTC, and LIHTC already has the voucher requirements embedded into that program as well. So I think we're continuing to work with housing folks just to make sure that we are covering the bases and making sure that we are providing as many opportunities as we can to leverage our public investments and how we invest our public dollars.
Okay, thank you, Todd. I think we heard it.
We're going to read the notes.
We'll read the notes. You're coming in kind of soft, Todd, but I think I got the gist of what you said. So that we'll read the notes, and I'm pretty sure this is only for presentation today. So I think there's some more I's to dot and T's to cross before it comes back to us. Ms. Whiteman?
That's exactly right, Mr. Graham. Again, we know that you all tasked us with this in February, and before we broke for the summer, the goal of this agenda and this particular item was to update you on kind of where we were with these three things in particular, and just wanted to get some reaction to where we're going, particularly on this rental subsidy policy, kind of hear any feedback from you. We will come back to you with a second draft of the policy, and then hopefully be able to move on to the full council for consideration at a future council meeting. So with that, I will stop, Mr. Graham, and turn back over to you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. And I will open it up to the committee for comments and our questions to our housing director. This is amazing. No comments, no questions. That means you guys are doing some good work today, right? On 3 items, 3 for 3, and maybe like 4 questions. Okay, so Ms. Whiteman will take that as concurrence to to move forward, to button it up a little bit more for us, to bring back, I guess, in the early fall. We have a meeting scheduled for August 18th, which will be our next meeting. We do not have a meeting in July, so we'll see you guys in August. This is the first committee meeting that's been under an hour, so I'm not sure.
Keep going.
Just keep going. So Julie said, Malcolm, be quiet and adjourn the meeting. So, if there's not any other comments from Ms. Wallington, Mr. Winston, Bukhari, I don't have any. Good meeting, and we'll see you guys in August. Take care.